All right. Hey, folks. So today's video is going to be a little bit different to my usual content, and it's going to be about mental health. This is something that I've been mulling over in my mind for a while and just been collating my thoughts on it. But I think it's important enough to discuss. And I'm going to be talking about how part of social media stunts the natural set of emotions that we should be able to develop to cause us to be well adjusted to society, and how a lot of what we share on social media and what we consume on social media, which looks like very positive stuff, like, growth mindset and entrepreneurship and all that kind of stuff, can actually be quite damaging for us. I want to sort of make the case for that and make the case for being a bit more well-rounded. So now, when I'm talking about stuff like this, I'm not talking about sort of obvious stuff that we can ignore. So like if we see images on the internet of like really, really skinny people and they're being held up as being beautiful and desirable, that stuff we can really ignore. Like there was controversy, at least in England in the late 90s, where Kate Moss was really under fire for being really skinny, and she was like the first of the supermodels who was just like super skinny, and there was a lot of talk about her saying she's setting unrealistic standards for women. And throughout the years, that's sort of gone in the other direction now, and you have very large models, perhaps not on the catwalks, but perhaps on social media, and you get the whole fat acceptance type of group. So I'm not talking about the obvious stuff like that. Like that's like pretty obvious. It's very divisive. Okay. I'm talking about more insidious stuff, more stuff which is actually very well-meaning, stuff which you guys probably watch and consume on a regular daily basis. And I know some of you do, because I follow you guys on, some of you on Instagram, and you share some of these posts. And I find, so what I'm talking about is like motivational posts. So let me explain. Now, most things that we consume on social media, which are supposed to be motivational, are generally full of very desirable people, is probably the best way of putting it. So people who are, whatever your interest is, either very well built, like very strong, or they're very lean, or they're very fit. I mean, think of all the popular guys you follow on the internet. They all have something going for them, in that they're all positive in some way. They're all like highly intelligent, highly successful in some way. They earn a lot of money. They're very, very strong. They're very lean. All that kind of stuff. Now, it's usually those people, and they're normally doing things which are demonstrating their desirability. So they might be, benching a lot of weight. They might be training their asses off, whatever. And they're also generally sort of sharing ideas which are deemed to be very positive. So they might be talking about, earning more money, getting stronger, getting leaner, all that kind of stuff. So it's all a very positive sphere. Now, that in and of itself is fine, because they can teach you how to do those things. However, what happens is that desirability as a concept, it becomes composed of the various sort of concepts that become popular in society. So, for example, things like having a growth mindset, okay, being strong, being resilient, just being happy in general, and being like real. These all become so psychological concepts which become popular in society. And I think you'll all agree with me so far. That is fine. So even if you're a very well-meaning consumer of content, you're still looking at content which might be in the end designed to even make you happy. I think Greg Doucette had a video on this recently where he was talking about goal setting and how the idea is to actually just be happy. However, and this is where I want to actually insert my own sort of perspective on this, is we are told to be all these things, or not told to be all things, but these things are all seen to be desirable. However, no one ever talks about sadness and anger. Okay, those aren't things which are normally seen as prized emotions. But we all get sad. We all get angry. And actually, sadness is a very useful, adaptive, healthy emotion. Anger is a natural response to an perceived injustice. If somebody wrongs you, you get angry. And so if something isn't going the way sort of you might expect it to go, or you think it's fair, or if you feel there's an injustice, then a natural reaction is to have a degree of anger, because you sense the unfairness. Now, if you didn't, it wouldn't be very good for your life moving forward and your progression throughout the species to propagate, be more successful, because you have certain expectations of yourself and expectations of situations. So sadness and anger are both useful emotions. How you act on sadness and anger is not the emotions themselves. So if you're sat there thinking, well, I don't want to be sat around crying, and I don't want to be getting angry and like punching walls and stuff, that's different. That's not the emotions of sadness and anger. That is how you act on them. Now, and this is part of the problem, because with all these motivational tips about, here is like grit, growth mindset, being strong, being lean, and here's how you do it, nobody ever discusses, well, what should you do if you get sad? What should you do if you're angry? Because they're very normal, natural emotions. But no one ever really talks about that. So we end up in this situation where we are maladjusted, because when those emotions happen, we don't know how to deal with those. When we get sad because we've been rejected, we don't know how to deal with it. When we get angry because of perceived injustice, we don't know how to deal with it, because nobody's really discussing those things. Now, so the emotions themselves, so the sadness and anger, they're associated with the behavior of sort of communicating the feelings to others, which improves the level of social support. So if you're in a relationship and your partner does something which makes you happy, or makes you angry, whatever they do, I don't know, let's say they forget to do the washing up on a regular basis, or I don't know, they don't help around the house, whatever it is, right? Whatever your situation is, whatever you with your partner is, if they constantly talk over you, or whatever it is. Now, if you deal with that emotion in the correct way, you should essentially solve the problem, or at least begin to solve the problem, discussing things with them in a rational way, and actually improve your relationship. Now, no one ever really discusses that. That's what I'm kind of talking about, or at least it's not seen as a prized emotion. So anger is a very useful adaptive emotion, just like sadness is. So both sadness and anger themselves are very healthy. What is unhealthy, what can be unhealthy, is how we deal with those strategies. So, for example, let's say you're sad because I don't know, something happens at work or whatever. The way that a lot of people deal with things is by binge eating. That's a large driver of binge eating. We know this from the research, is some sort of sadness, like some situation in your life which you don't feel are changeable. Perhaps a relationship which isn't going very well, perhaps a lack of reciprocation in your love life, in your emotional life with your partner. Those are all sort of triggers for people to have these binge eating issues. I'm not saying that's the only thing, because obviously very harsh restriction and genetic predisposition also exposes people to binge eating behavior. But that initial kick can often be a sort of sad trauma in their life. Now, if you're unaware of how to deal with that trauma in a healthy, productive way, and how to improve that situation, or at least accept it, then you're not going to be able to do that, and you may end up reacting to it and dealing with that emotion in a negative way. So that's sort of one way. Another thing that people do is like taking drugs. Let's say you're looking on social media the whole time, and you're looking at all these people who are massive, shredded, successful, and you're thinking, wow, I want to be like these people, but they're all just secretly on steads. Then that may cause you to go on steads as well. Like that may cause you to take roids, because you're not able to marry your position in the world and the unfairness of that with what these people are doing. And they are those desirable people on the internet who are saying, yes, you got to be mentally tough, you got to be resilient, you got to be successful, you got to be lean, you got to be shredded all the time. And you're thinking, well, I'm trying as hard as I can, and this is not happening. So you may well come to the realization that, okay, I'm going to deal with this in a negative sort of way, and I'm going to just go and take a bunch of roids, and I'm going to do that instead. Great. Now I'm going to be happy. So there are ways of dealing with things, with these emotions, that if we're not taught how to do them properly, if we're not taught how to deal with our sadness, if we're not taught how to deal with our anger, we may take the more destructive routes towards, say, binge eating behavior, towards taking drugs, towards having a really poor relationship with our bodies, towards using social media as a crutch. I mean, you see it all the time online. People will go online to literally look for attention, to sort of try and satiate their need for feeling desirable. You know, literally, there's a trend on TikTok and YouTube Shorts where it's like, if you had 24 hours with me and I couldn't say no, what would you do? Like, that's literally begging for, give me some positive feedback, because I am showing you the best of myself. I'm very pretty. Tell me I'm pretty, kind of thing. So, and then you have other people who will go on social media and sort of make negative comments to people, you know, to say, hey, that video is crap, or they disagree with them. Reddit's full of it. Reddit is, in some Reddit subs are a trash heap. And I imagine it is just a lot of people who are very maladjusted to their feelings of sadness and anger. And so they act out in this way, or maybe just like inadequacy, the inadequacy they feel, which causes them to be sad or angry. So all of these are negative actions which could potentially result from the very honest emotions of sadness and anger, which we act in those ways because we just don't know how to deal with them, because no one's talking about that. Like, very few people share posts about sadness, apart from just maybe a few sort of emo posts about, hey, you know, we should be sad. But actually, how do you deal with sadness and anger in a healthy way? So, for example, you know, the question about like relationships, it's a very good one. You know, open and honest communication, that's a good way of actually solidifying the relationship. So if you have a problem with your partner, if there's something going on, and let's say it's a relatively new relationship, you know, 1 or 2 years, and you've just started to live together, of course there's going to be stuff which is going to get on your nerves. Of course there is. But it's a case of, okay, how am I going to deal with this? Now, if that person is not living up to your high expectations of what desirable people should do, how they should behave, because they should be, you know, productive, happy, you know, should be communication. Even the idea of communication is prized very highly. Like, if they're not doing that, then you may well be sad and maybe get angry at them and deal with that in the wrong way. So because we're not really prizing the emotion of sadness, we end up not really sharing how to deal with it. And I think that's a problem, and that's where people get maladjusted, because then they look for alternate ways to be satiated from what the effects of those emotions, sadness and anger. So they go online, they pick fights, they try and get attention from people in different ways, in weird ways, which often aren't very healthy, and still don't get to the root of the problem. Like sadness, just to go back to that, it's a useful emotion which sort of allows us to frame our own future expectations. So, like, I'll give you my very real example. It is my part of my sadness is sort of realizing that my best strength is probably behind me. Like, my strongest days are probably behind me. I don't think realistically there's any way that I'm going to be as strong as I was. Now, there's a sense of sadness there. Now, I could, if I wanted to, or if I was not behaving rationally, I could then say, okay, well, maybe I should just try bulking up a little bit as well. But then the rational side of me thinks, Faz, you're 40. The guys who carry on bulking in their 40s usually end up dead in their 50s. It's probably not a good idea. So sadness helps you frame that, because, okay, why am I sad? I'm sad because of this realization. What can I do about that? Well, what I can do about that is have a sense of acceptance and perhaps look at some new goals. Perhaps consider that, okay, I'm sad because I know that this is what needs to happen, and downsizing in my 40s is the right thing to do, and just accepting that that's the right thing to do. It's not easy, you know. I mean, people see me downsize and go, whoa, Faz, you lost some size, and it does get you there, you know, it does. But again, it's that trying to find a rational logical way of looking at things, saying, you know what, I had my heyday of my strength, you know, I've got a cupboard full of trophies from various powerlifting shows, strongman, bodybuilding, all that kind of stuff, right? And maybe that's not for me anymore, because if I carry on pushing it, it's not going to have a happy ending. So sadness allows you to frame your future expectations and then look at those in a logical way to think, okay, what can I actually do moving forward? Anger is also another one. Like, it allows us to react positively to situations which don't meet our own expectations. So this is a healthy response to ego. Now, again, just to emphasize at this point, because anger is a tricky one, how we react to anger is a very separate matter from the feeling in itself. Like, I can be angry sat here in front of you guys and you might not know it, okay? Because I'm not acting on it, okay? But it's in me. Anger as an emotion versus anger as how you express that anger, that's very, very different. So let's not get the two confused. Anger is not bad in and of itself. In and of itself, it's fine. A healthy response to, for example, let's say you have an encounter with somebody at work and they're rude, okay? A healthy response to that conflict may be to resolve that conflict in a professional manner. Now, what that does do is it gives you practice in dealing with angry people in the future, because you're going to come across those. Now, how many times have you seen somebody repost something on the internet talking about haters? Like, yep, I got a bunch of haters. And I always think to myself, like, do you actually have a bunch of haters, or do you just really have a very poor conflict resolution? Because like online, you're going to get some haters. There will literally be, like I've talked about earlier, there will literally be people who will get their kicks from going onto your video and giving you abuse. Fortunately, I don't get much of that because you guys are lovely. Thank you. And you know, I'm just trying to help. But there, it happens. You know, the bigger accounts get a lot of this. But so I often think, like, but going back to what I was saying, people who post things about, you know, haters and all that kind of stuff, I often think a lot of that is more than likely just a lack of conflict resolution. And I think they just end up being very sheltered. It's a very sort of like snowflake syndrome, as it were. Like, they just don't want to be involved in discussions and have those, because they would rather just not deal with that. So they go, everyone's a hater. It's like, they're kind of not. You know, they've got a valid point. They've actually got a part of your personality you might want to change. And I think that's when conflict resolution should come into play. So it can make you better at conflict resolution, but it can also potentially make you learn something that you may not have been doing previously. So, yeah, I mean, just to kind of end with this, like, I comment quite a lot of sort of really positive comments around YouTube. Like, I post on a lot of accounts, like various accounts that I follow, and I always post positive things. And it's not because I'm some fucking simp who wants like reciprocal, you know, likes and stuff like that. It's because if you are a well-adjusted human, okay, if you're well-adjusted emotionally, you can afford to spread your positivity around, I believe. Like, I don't have any qualms about giving somebody props if they're doing good work. And I think it's important. And so I feel like, because I'm relatively emotionally balanced now at this age, like I never used to be, like, trust me, I'm not perfect, but I'm a lot better along than I was sort of 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Like, I feel like I'm rich enough in my emotions that I can spread that positivity and I can give people props and encourage them, because I think there's a real lack of that in the world. I think people go around very guarded because they don't always know how to deal with their emotions. And so they're always guarded. They never want to let their guard down. They're very tight with their emotions. And I think it sometimes takes you to be the bigger person to go, okay, I want to just post on this guy's video and go, hey, dude, you know, props to you. You're doing some good work. I appreciate your content. Just to say, hey, you know, just to give them a pat on the back. They might not feel like they need it, but I think, you know, if we're being realistic, it's probably because they're a little bit defensive, because they maybe have been in situations in the past where people have not been particularly nice to them, and so they have a sense of, they have their guard up. But I think most people like to be around other people who are reciprocally nice, as I do, and I feel sometimes you have to make the first step there. So, yeah, just kind of in summary, I think the main message I want to say here is, like, we very rarely prize the emotions of sadness and anger. We mostly prize positive emotions of moving forward, mindset, resilience, happiness, all that kind of stuff. And in doing so, what happens is we become maladjusted to how to deal with the very real emotions and very normal and healthy emotions of sadness and anger when they arise. We just don't know what to do with them. And I think that's what causes people to then go online, which is a very quick and easy way of appeasing whatever emotion they're feeling, whether that's sadness or anger, and whether that's through directly acting on sadness or anger, or whether it's distracting them from what they're feeling, just like people get involved in negative activities which are destructive, like binge eating behavior, over restriction, taking drugs, all that kind of stuff. It's simply, the root of it is really quite simple. It's the maladjustment to society, is what it is. That's what I believe it is, at least in part anyway. It's a maladjustment to society because we've not really been told how to deal with sadness and anger until you go through quite a lot of introspection and you're a lot later in life. And so I feel like I'm getting there. Like, I'm not an expert. I'm just trying to share my experiences and my thoughts on the matter. But yeah, that's, in summary, that's kind of how I feel about it. And I think if you are sad and if you are angry, it's okay to try and find productive ways of dealing with those, rather than strategies which just distract you or which actually harm people around you or harm yourself. I think it's important to recognize that while sadness and anger aren't emotions which are like highly desirable, they're going to happen, and you need to know how to deal with them productively rather than just ignore them or act on them in a negative way. Hopefully, guys, that was interesting for you, and have a great Sunday. Take care.